Welcome to StartupJab.
And welcome to episode 86 of StartupJab. We promise it won't be boring. I am
86.
Oh, 86. Did I say 86? It's 26. Somebody catch me on that. Feels like it. You know, with you, it feels like 86. I said it. Welcome to episode 26. We promise it won't be boring because it hasn't been already. I'm one of your two hosts, Jason Ellis. With me, as always, the Amy Poehler to my Tina Fey, Teague Hopkins. Teague, how are you, buddy?
Pretty great. That's an excellent comparison.
I wanted to try for something new.
I wish I were that
you
funny.
are, just in your own way. Truthfully, I mean, if we're talking about actual archetypes, you're a little bit more the Tina Fey, and I'm a little bit more the Amy Poehler. But I can't pull off blonde hair like that. So,
whereas I can certainly pull off blonde hair.
Oh yeah, obviously. Yeah. So it's been an interesting couple of weeks. You know, we're also. We're acknowledging today since our last episode, the loss of a couple of great musicians and actors in the day. David Bowie, of course, being sort of the big news, secondary perhaps only to Alan Rickman, but also we lost Glenn Frey too from the Eagles, which is actually a pretty big hit. Lemmy before that, we had Natalie Cole. What the hell is up with 2016, dude?
Yeah, I mean, people get older.
Well, yeah, but all of them dropping like flies within the first 3 weeks of the year, a sign of things to come? Do you think those doomsday cults are finally getting what they said they were going to have for all this time, that the world is coming to an end as signaled by the loss of the godless celebrities that apparently they also hate? I mean, I'm just saying.
All hell's
There
Zorb.
you go. All hail Zorb. Oh, another Parks and Rec reference. You're my boy. Anyway, we've got a lot to cover today. I don't want to take up too much of it of predicting the doom and gloom of celebrities across the world. One of them is going to listen to this and write in, and then we're going to just respond, oh, good, celebrities listen to us. But that's not the point.
Exactly.
There we go. So today we're going to talk about a ton of stuff as usual. And, of course, we'll be taking questions and all the interesting stuff that can come out of that. But I want to start first by talking about something very specifically related to the adventures of an entrepreneur. There's an article that came out from Buffer, and yes, that is the same Buffer that, for those of you who do social media programming, you'll recognize. They have a really robust blog. I absolutely recommend taking a look at it. They have an article from this past December on a concept called the healthy uncomfortable. And this is something that if you've been building your own business, you are very, very familiar with. Teague, you must have some of this. I know I do.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple pieces of the article that I really like. And the first one is the diagram of, you've got these concentric circles in the middle, you've got your comfort zone, right? And then one step out from that is the courage zone, where you have, growth and opportunity, confidence and bravery. And then beyond that, there's another outside ring that they call the terror zone, which is where you get to paralysis and overwhelm. And that's like, okay, sometimes you feel like you're a little bit too far out and you need to just like pull it back a little bit. And then other times you feel like, okay, I'm getting a little bored, time to push. But it's trying to get into that middle zone where you are constantly pushing yourself and constantly growing, but without getting overwhelmed and without getting complacent.
Yeah, I would say that the thing for me that's really interesting about it is just how ubiquitous the experience is for everyone. And that it doesn't necessarily even apply to just those that are starting a business, but in fact applies to everyone across the board. I find I was having a conversation with, of all people, my mother the other day, who is trying to get back into writing and illustrating. And when I was growing up, she was a phenomenal artist at both. But it's been so long since she's really pursued any seriously that she's suddenly in that spot where she's pushing out of her comfort zone. And I think your point to the diagram is absolutely perfect, that there's somewhere in between, comfort zone and terror zone where, you just have to have some courage to try the new thing. In my mother's case, it's picking up a damn pen and doing something with it, but that's neither here nor there.
I think for many of us, it's picking up a whatever and doing something with it. It's the, getting beyond the planning stage and actually doing something And then, once you've started doing something, sharing it with people. And I know, for me, that's one of the hardest things is when I have started something and I don't feel like it's quite ready yet, but really just need to, go ahead and send it out there, get it in front of a few people. And it's going to be so much more valuable than if I try to perfect it and then put it in front of those people and get their feedback.
Absolutely. Well, and I think in terms of the question of feedback, you also can find some little tips and tricks to help yourself get past that discomfort. Time boxing is my favorite technique. If I say I've got to make an uncomfortable decision and I've only got 20 minutes to hem and haw about it, and then I really need to make a decision, you force yourself into that action. And I think that's incredibly important when you're facing your own anxiety, your own resistance, your own sense of self-doubt. Forcing yourself to make a decision is often, even if it's not necessarily the right decision, quote unquote, it is ultimately the decision that needs to be made in the moment, and you're just going to have to deal with the consequences. Utilizing that.
No, I love time boxing.
Oh,
yeah. I keep wanting to get a t-shirt made that says something like, no matter the question, time boxing is the answer.
That's a very appropriate response for a lot of the questions that we have to deal with as entrepreneurs and startup founders. And truthfully, actually, it's the question that we all need. I mean, what do I need to make for dinner? I don't know. Time box it. Give yourself 10 minutes to think it through, and then just pick a damn thing and eat it. Because
if you plan for 12 hours, it's no longer dinner.
No, if you plan for 12 hours on a meal, then you're just starving. Actually, boy, there is a perfect image that we should save for something in the future. That is spectacular. I'm going to write that down. Anyway, so I think that the one thing the question to ask oneself is, what are the ways in which we're intentionally making ourselves uncomfortable? As I've shared here, have merged my business with another. I'm doing something totally different. I'm in a position and a place right now that is definitively challenging. And things could go a lot of different directions, and many of them okay, and many of them not good. And I think this is the only place in which I find where I can grow, because otherwise I'm just comfortable and I'm doing my thing. Do you have the same experience?
Yeah, well, and I really like the 6 uncomfortable questions that are at the end of that Buffer article. I thought those were great prompts for sort of digging deeper into exactly that question you just asked, which is, where am I actually pushing beyond my comfort zone? And going through those. So the first one, do I keep doing what's always been done or challenge old assumptions and try new approaches and problems? No problem there. I'm always challenging old assumptions, perhaps too much on occasion. And the second one, do I proactively seek new challenges or just manage those I already have? I think, I feel like I'm always looking for new challenges. I get bored if I don't have new challenges. But it's those next 4. Well, okay, maybe not the last one. The last one's about, do I speak my mind? And I tend to speak my mind pretty vociferously.
I believe that is, in fact, first of all, nice use of the word vociferously. Second of all, I think that is never a question for you. You always speak your mind. It's not a bad quality for the most part.
So I'll say it's those yeah, right, for the most part. It's those other 3 that I could probably work on. Right? It's this, do I risk being exposed and vulnerable or act to protect my pride and patch of power? That's, we're just talking about the wanting to polish something before actually putting it out there, before actually saying, hey, here's a thing that I'm working on that I care about. Tell me what you think of it. And the next, what is this? The 4th one, do I ask for what I really want or just for what I think others want to give me? I think so many people could get better at that.
Sure, absolutely. I
think that is a really difficult challenge for a lot of folks is we don't want to ask for things that we think people might say no to.
Yes and no. I mean, I agree with you to an extent. I think that if you're going to embrace the idea, to those 2 questions specifically, I think if you're going to embrace the idea of being a boundary pusher for yourself, then you have no choice, right? And it is absolutely true that if you don't push yourself in that direction, it's very easy to stay in this sort of small little concentric circle of comfort. But I actually, to be honest, I would argue that the 4th question, the one about being vulnerable more than being polished, is the thing that actually I think holds people back the most. In my experience, there are very few people, myself included, who I would say have really understood what it takes to be vulnerable with other people in a conventional sense. Because we're vulnerable.
We're going to channel some Brene Brown here.
You would.
She's fantastic.
But my point simply is that there are a lot of people out there who feel in their lives, and I don't just mean in their professional lives, but in their personal lives as well, that need to be protected. You need that wall. I need to defend myself against any oncoming attacks. And the vulnerability applies not only to letting people in, but also to letting yourself out a little bit too, to step on that shaky branch. And I think ultimately that's what boils down to whether people take the risks, contrary to superseding everything else. If you don't feel like you're in a vulnerable, if you don't feel safe in vulnerability, then you're never going to make any changes or push in any uncomfortable directions.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think in a lot of ways, that's why it's so important to have a strong support network as an entrepreneur, as anybody working in an area where there's a lot of ambiguity and uncertainty, because sometimes it's not going to go well. Sometimes you are going to, get knocked down, and you need to, you can't rely solely on yourself to get back up.
I get knocked down.
You're thinking about
I get up again.
Aren't you? Yeah.
Yeah. You're never going to keep me down. You knew that was coming. As soon as you said that line, you should have known that reference was coming. Because
no, I absolutely knew. I walked right into that one.
And then you and I are a child of the 90s. Get over it. Anyway. No, I agree. I think. No, please, you.
Yeah.
I insist.
No, I think. Yeah. I was going to say, I want to throw out the fifth question in there also, because we just didn't mention it, about do I toot my own horn to ensure others know what I'm capable of, or just hope my efforts will be noticed? I don't know about you. I have a lot of trouble with that one. I think, I'm very uncomfortable talking about my accomplishments. And I think it's, a lot of the, when you go through so many years of schooling where it's ostensibly a meritocracy, and then you get to the real world and it's kind of like, well, it's not so much about being good at stuff. It's the combination of the, maybe the intersection of being good at stuff and telling people about it. It's the concept of luck surface area, right? Do cool things and tell people. I
don't know. I mean, I think for me, actually, it's I'm not afraid or unhappy in talking about my accomplishments. I don't think of them. I mean, I live in a very, what have you done for me lately? Yeah. Which is a question I say to myself, not to anybody else, but I live in that sort of world for myself, that sense of what have I done recently that I can hang my hat on. And I'm not very good. Can we go off topic for 2 seconds? Because actually this is something I'm happy to share, but this is actually like things I've spoken to my therapist about, if we want to go down that road. Okay.
Sure.
I'll take it.
Sounds like a good tangent.
I am particularly not good about acknowledging and recognizing the things that I have accomplished. And some of that is the result of just the way that I'm built. And I think you and I are both in that same vein. We look for the things that we're good at, and we try to continue to build on them, to grow on them, but we don't want to rest on our laurels. We want to keep doing good things. When I find myself resting on my laurels, I'm in the opposite side of this whole, embracing the uncomfortable. And I sit square in the middle of, I'm really happy with myself. I'm going to do great. When I encounter a challenge, my first thought is I'm, fight or flight. I'm flight. I mean, my people survived by running as fast as they could in the other direction. And I don't often think about the risks that I've taken already, the accomplishments that I've gotten out of them, and the failures that have turned into successes as a result. I don't know if other people share this. I suspect that some, in fact, probably many do. But I think it's one of those challenges that we often think is really specific and unique to us, that we somehow are not as good as everybody else. It dovetails into imposter syndrome very quickly. But as a result, we end up not acknowledging that actually many of us are smart, capable, risk-taking individuals who just sometimes need to get our brains reset a little bit. Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head with imposter syndrome, right? I think for people who are not familiar, imposter syndrome is the idea that you have somehow slipped through the filters and you will be found out any day now, and you will, everybody will realize that you're not as good as you seem to be. And it's one of those things that, sure, almost everybody in a high performing environment feels that way to some degree. And honestly, it's really easy to fall into the habit of feeling comfortable with where you are and not realizing that around you things are happening that you're not getting caught up on. I mean, I'm totally, telling my story here, I guess, but I had to have a conversation with one of my business partners about the fact that, my presentation to others in the office wasn't matching what it needed to be. simply because I was just in a comfortable spot and I knew what I could get done. And, well, if I'm watching a YouTube video or two, that's not a big deal, right? That stuff matters. And I think in the end, it forced me to take a step back and recognize the position that I was in and realize that it was time to step up my game and put myself back in that uncomfortable position and to ultimately decide if I was going to participate or, pardon my language, shit or get off the pot. So I know we're labeled explicit on iTunes for a reason. It's fine.
Yeah, no, that all rings true to me. Yeah, I think it's also easy to to sometimes fall into the trap of the things that I feel like are accomplishments versus the things that other people see as accomplishments, right? And I think that. So Hannah in the chat is talking about sometimes there are things I do that are certainly accomplishments, and I can know that intellectually, and other people can tell me that, but it doesn't feel like that to me because I'm seeing all the things that I planned to do and didn't do, or the things that I could take it a step further and haven't yet.
I think there's a difference between what people see in sort of on stage versus behind the curtain, if you'll allow me the theater metaphor.
Oh, absolutely.
There's a difference between what people see and perceive and they interpret versus what you do to yourself. And as Andy's saying in the chat here, we're our own worst critics by far. I am absolutely far harder on myself than most people are, which isn't to say that I don't get justified criticism from other people. It's just that when I do, it gets amplified 100,000 times because I'm an erotic anxious Jew, and that's what I do to myself. All right. Maybe not the Jewish part, but every other part of that is absolutely fair in terms of, classification and clarification. But my point being, I think that we spend a lot of time worrying about what other people think. And we spend a lot of time worrying about them seeing us for some sort of perceived falsehood, when in reality, sometimes it's okay to acknowledge. It's not about humility or modesty. Sometimes it's good to acknowledge your successes and to be okay acknowledging your failures as well and just balancing the two out. Anyway.
Yeah.
So absolutely. One thing I do want to ask, because I'm curious your thoughts on this, and I have some resources I'm happy to share as well. What do we think would be some ways that people could find a support network or some sort of, I don't know, some sort of coaching to find ways to work through these problems? I mean, what's been successful for you?
I don't know whether my approach has been is really indicative of anything. It's sort of been a piecemeal approach. I've gotten really involved in the startup community in DC, and I speak at a lot of events, and I as a result I see the same other speakers and sit on panels with the same people time and again, and that sort of has become part of my my community and my support network. I know there's also there's like founder and CEO groups, things like Vistage or NetCito. I don't know. I've never participated in one of those, but I know that some people find those valuable.
So for those unfamiliar, though, NetCito and Vistage, and I think there's Young Entrepreneurs Club, and there's a bunch of different ones. These are organizations. NetCito is specific to DC, but if you're in the area, it's certainly worth checking out. But these are organizations that are built to provide support and essentially, I mean, I don't want to call it group therapy, but group conversation around how you as an entrepreneur can better manage your work, your work-life balance, your process, your strategy, et cetera. I think,
and a lot of it is built on the understanding that when you're the CEO, it's lonely at the top, and you can't really share your fears with your employees because you don't want to freak people out. I mean, you want to be honest about what's going on in the company, but there's a line you draw between like the things that are actually going wrong, and the things that you're afraid might go wrong. You don't need to burden everybody else with that. And so sometimes the only people you can talk to who really understand that are other CEOs or sometimes CEO coaches.
Well, that is the truth.
Executive coaches.
I definitely made the rookie mistake of sharing a little bit too much detail with one of my employees at one point and had to rectify that over time. It's well, I mean, when it's you and one or two other people in the office, and sometimes you, even as the CEO, sometimes overlap we're friends, we're employee, you're my employees, et cetera. That line blurs, and you say one thing and suddenly you realize that was squarely in the "you're my employee, I should not have shared that with you" line. And not that anybody was going to quit or anything weird, but it was just strange. It was a hard conversation to have after that. Yeah, I don't know. It's a lot of that stuff is being in that uncomfortable place for me. I know that that's the right place. I know that that's the place that gets us where we need to go in the end. It never gets easier, does it? It never gets better. It just gets more repetitive, I guess. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same problem, different magnitude,
Okay.
right? Like as you're growing, some of the same problems crop up, but you have to deal with them in different ways as the company is growing, and it's, as you said, like if there's only like 3 of you and there's 2 founders and an employee, sometimes you don't want to share stuff with that one employee that you would share with the other founder. But the same, you run into the same problems when you're 25 or 50 or 100 people. It's just the magnitude of the problems may be slightly different.
Boy, that is true. Yeah. Well, that certainly generated quite a bit of conversation. Any last thoughts on that before we move on?
I have a feeling we will keep coming back to that one time and again.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think I don't know. I think that ultimately this is a conversation worth talking about over and over again. For those of you listening, I would love it if you'd give us your thoughts, questions, concerns, because we'd love to hear more about it. Yeah. I don't know. It's definitely a challenge that never goes away.
Yeah. So moving on from the sort of existential startup problems to the slightly more tactical startup problems, we've got a set of questions here. I mentioned that I speak on panels from time to time, and tonight I'm speaking on one of those panels for the Startup Leadership Program here in DC. And they've got a list of questions that we're going to talk about tonight. And so I thought maybe we would I would use this as an opportunity to practice a couple of those answers, get a head start. So we're gonna take a couple of those questions that we thought might be interesting to a wider audience and dive into them here.
Let's do it. I'm super excited. Too much? I was a little hard there. I'm sorry.
No, it's good. It's good. The excitement is good. I'll take what I can get. So the first question deals with, and in fact, a bunch of these questions are dealing with some of the big challenges that face startups that are in the scaling phase, right? It's about customer acquisition and finding those first customers and how you grow into that. So the first question we've got is about channels, and it's we know that it's easy to waste a lot of money in the wrong channels, right? Especially if you're not taking a measured approach to it, if you're not running small experiments to see what works. It's easy to sort of pour money into something and then not realize for 6 months that money is just going down the drain. And so the question is about what customer acquisition channels did you initially choose to target your first customers, and why? And how do you know if a channel is working for you or not?
Well, I suppose that's a little bit like saying, I know I need a car. What kind should I get? I mean, I think that, well,
sure. Yeah.
Let's talk about it from a sales perspective. So there's a very different approach when you're selling a product, which is a one-time purchase, versus a service or a subscription or any sort of one-on-one therapy type, just because we were talking about it earlier, but any type of one-on-one engagement in that way, coaching, teaching, etc. All of those have very different answers. I would say, and this is where Kiki gets angry at us, that you can lean startup your way through that question by putting out feelers in a couple of different areas, but being methodical about it and keeping the cost low by doing it on a very pragmatic level. If somebody's selling clothes, for example, I mean, I go out with 25 t-shirts and just see if 25 people will buy them. When it comes to selling a service, can I call enough people that I can get 10 people to give me their credit cards? I think that one of the challenges with that, and I'm sure you would agree with this, Teague, is that it's not about knowing ahead of time. Like, it's not about choosing the right acquisition channel. It's about starting in a place and learning from that, and then driving it as you need to.
Music to my ears.
It is.
Yes. Yeah. No, I totally agree that it doesn't so much matter which acquisition channel you choose to start with. It matters more how quickly you can pivot from that one to one that's actually working. And so a lot of that ties into the second part of the question. How do you know if a channel is working for you? Well, you have to measure it, right? You have to actually design an experiment and set yourself a time box, going back to our discussion on time boxing. And then also set a minimum success criteria. So, before you start, tell yourself, write down what means that this is a successful channel and what means this is not a successful channel, because it's easy to afterwards go back and look at the numbers and say, well, that seems pretty good. Let's keep doing that. Right. But what you want to capture is, before you started, what did you expect to get out of it? And if you're running small experiments, it's often easy to run those experiments with multiple channels in parallel, right? You can easily test, for example, Facebook ads and Google AdWords, and I don't know what other paid marketing things do people even use now?
Twitter, Facebook, Google AdWords, Pinterest, Instagram.
It's all the social channels now, right?
Effectively, yeah. And actually, you don't even necessarily need to spend money on it. If you can go to your own Facebook feed, if you're like me and you're super popular and you've got a bunch of people that you can call on and say, hey guys, I'm trying this thing out. If anybody's genuinely interested in it, give me your credit card information. In fact, if nobody signs up from that, they're your friends. They're supposed to do the nice stuff for you. If they don't, you really don't have any trust, and you need to think about some other way of pursuing your customers. I mean,
I'm going to type my credit card information into your Facebook post as a comment, right?
Just leave your social security number. I'll take care of the rest. I think. There's plenty of channels available, and you're absolutely right. In fact, actually, when I've run startup weekends, or when we've done the lean startup machine and all that stuff, I mean, if you happen to have $50 that you can put towards buying against a Facebook campaign, even with a relatively short period of time, you can learn a lot very quickly. The challenge ultimately is making sure that you're targeting the right kinds of things. It doesn't really help me if I'm selling you a service to see if that you want to also buy the hats and T-shirts we happen to be selling on the side, right? I mean, as blunt and inelegant as that example is, I think it still bears true that a lot of people test things they don't need to test, and they worry about the wrong things. They tend to think about the pretty stuff when they sometimes need to focus on the meat and potatoes.
Yeah. Well, I want to go back to a couple of things that you mentioned earlier and just pay particular attention to them, because I think they're really important. One, in the beginning, a lot of it is you call people up and try to sell them your service, right? If you don't have 100 customers yet, then you're not ready to actually go out and do mass market ads or try to build an inbound marketing platform or try to do any of these replicable and scalable models. If you're in your first 100 customers, you really just kind of need to actually call people up and do the things that don't scale and offer to help them solve a problem and find out what they say, because you'll learn a lot more that way than if you put up a landing page and see whether you can drive traffic to it, right? I think we've talked before on the show about the bandwidth of communication curve. And at the top of that, it's the amount of information you get out of each interaction. At the top of that, you've got your face-to-face interaction when you actually sit down with a prospect and talk to them about the problem you're trying to solve. You get a lot more information than if you send someone to a landing page, right? If you send someone to a landing page and they're not interested, you get no directional information about why they're not interested. And
interestingly, you can learn lessons even after when you anticipate it. You just reminded me that the weekend that many, many moons ago, when I was working on my Lean Startup Machine project on, cheap marketing for ebook authors, it was such a bad idea. But even though at the actual end of the weekend, we didn't have as much data as we wanted, for 3 days after, we suddenly got a flood of responses from self-published ebook authors who actually had very interesting things to say, which would have totally changed the course of the work that we had been offering. So I think that one of the things that we sometimes do is set false expectations around when we actually think that we've either come to an answer or haven't. And it can be equally detrimental to set a false timeline for yourself and to try to artificially drive yourself in a particular direction. So there's that.
Yeah. Yeah. And in particular, we're not looking at medical studies or randomized controlled trials here. We're making business decisions. And so at some point, we're not getting proof. We're getting down to, is this a reasonable bet to make? Right. It's in a lot of ways, I like to make the analogy to blackjack or to poker. It's not, am I 100% certain this is going to work? It's, do I want to make this bet and see what the next cards are? Well,
and there's a reason that more people do if you want to make money, they tell you to go play poker or blackjack because the odds are relatively consistent based on your understanding of, what to do in certain moves. I mean, I'm not saying that it's by any means foolproof.
As opposed to roulette.
Yeah, or craps. Yeah, I mean, it's,
Okay, right.
So, and actually, I was reading an article the other day that was talking about if you go to a casino, what you should do. And they say, if you just want to make money, go to the blackjack table. Here's a table of all the different moves that can happen. Memorize this. Sean in the chat is saying that craps actually has the best odds in the house, which may be true, but there isn't the same kind of methodical approach that you can do as you can in, say, blackjack, where it's based on what you have and what the dealer has. The smartest move is X, and if you just let that system extend until infinity, you will eventually make some money back, if not more than what you started with.
Basically, it's saying don't just play random odds. Play something where skill can actually make a difference, and then actually get good at that skill.
I mean, having said that,
right?
It's a lot more fun to play craps. It's a lot more fun to get it right at roulette. There is a difference. Fair point. I have never won money at a casino. I always walk out poorer. So I might not be the best guy to give this advice.
On average, that is the way they work. Right?
If you assume you're
that's how they stay in business.
assume you're going to lose, then you're going to have fun at least. So there you go. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Spend your money on the buffet, as Mr. Wonderful is telling us. Anyway. So
the other thing, I wanted to go back to the other thing you said about if you're posting on Facebook and your friends aren't even saying like, yeah, I'm interested in that, then you really know you don't have something. And conversely, if the feedback that you're getting is, yes, this is awesome, but it's only from your friends and family, you have to discount that as well.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. No, I think that in any instance where somebody has a strong opinion of you in the positive, and they're saying, yes, absolutely, I would totally pay for that, and here's my credit card information, you have to assume that it's because they like you. It's only good if you get a non-response or a negative response that tells you you're absolutely in the wrong direction. Positive response in opposition does not necessarily mean you're in the right direction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So the next question that we have from the list of the SLP questions is about the difference between early adopters and the rest of the market. And we've got a question about what lessons you've learned with segmenting your customers and creating target strategies based on those segments. And then how did you use references or client success stories to grow your customer base? So there's a couple of different things sort of rolled together in this question. The first one about early adopters versus the rest of the market, I think is an interesting one. And then we'll transition into the rest of the question. Yeah.
Depending on the business, early adopters make or break you. I don't think there's any question about that. We have, here in the live audience, Sean, who's the CEO of Blab, who I'm sure would probably attest to the fact that, early adopters help get a lot of the momentum and growth and attention to the platform. I know that from my days at Hulu, if we hadn't had a lot of really diehard people in the beta who were talking up a storm the day that we went public, that would have negatively affected our impact. Conversely, they don't necessarily make you every time either. You can have a passionate user base that starts off as an early adopter, segment, but never carries you because you're really meant for you build something that's really cool to people who like a really specific, nerdy thing, but that doesn't translate to a larger, more general audience.
Right. Well, and you can also run into the challenge of if you over optimize for your early adopters, you may be moving away from something that would be more interesting to a mainstream audience. Right. It's an easy trap to fall into when you have, when you've got a small customer base and you are, and you're getting feedback from them, which is wonderful, right? Like early customers who give you feedback are worth their weight in gold. But if you over optimize for that before you get some folks in who are, late adopters or the early majority or late adopters, segments, based on crossing the chasm, right? I figure we should reference it's Jeffrey Moore. Is that
It's not Thomas Moore.
Jeffrey Moore.
That's Utopia. Never mind. Go ahead.
Right, different one. Utopia is what happens after you sell your startup.
Or win the lottery.
Yeah. Or win it craps.
Exactly.
Yeah. The crossing the chasm. If you over optimize for your early adopters, you may end up moving away from the things that would actually be attractive to an early majority, and it can be dangerous because you when you're getting that feedback, it's easy to see that as the whole universe of users, and even when you have a lot of users, it's difficult sometimes to see that the people who give you feedback are the vocal minority in some cases. Yeah. There may be a lot of folks who are using it and using it well and just aren't telling you because it works fine the way it is and they don't need you to change it.
Well, and I think that there's a great deal to be said for knowing your audience. It may be that your early adopters are your only audience, and maybe it's okay to double down on that. I think that there are, I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I'm sure if we took 5 minutes to do some Googling, there are probably plenty of companies that said, oh, we want to build a thing that works for everybody, and then found a thing that really works for a certain subset of people, and they grew it from there. Maybe even, I mean, actually, now that I'm saying it out loud, it's not quite the same, but Instagram is probably a great example of, you know, a service that wanted to build photo editing that was accessible from your phone. What they really ended up with was something where a lot of people really liked just the filter part of it. And they went, okay, let's just do that instead. And let's focus on that audience. And that grew them to the multi-billion-dollar company that they became. Must be nice.
Yeah. Well, you know, as we said, it's same problems, larger scale.
I would like that scale. That would be nice for me.
High quality problems.
Exactly.
Right?
Well, and Teague, I'm curious on your thoughts on this because, you know, the question of using references or client success stories to grow your customer base, I know that that's something that we are constantly using in our business development and outreach. I assume that you're doing the same thing in yours.
It accounts for at least 90% of my business. In fact, in early days, it was so successful that I kind of neglected building other marketing channels. Which can be a problem because like referrals are great and they come to you and they're warm and they already, you know, they've sought you out. But then when you don't have referrals, you don't have a gas pedal to push down on to be like, okay, fill the pipeline now. You're just sort of like sitting around waiting for somebody to hear about you and want to work with you. So it's a great, you know, it's a great channel. It has some problems if you use it in isolation, which I have definitely fallen prey to.
Yeah, absolutely. As somebody who does, I mean, my agency is a little too young, and particularly with the merger, it's not, the brand recognition isn't there yet, but we have to use customer success stories as our ways of gaining trust for people who sometimes have been referred to us and sometimes we're speaking to cold. And even though I'm not a guy who spends his day just calling people and trying to get their business, it matters when you're meeting somebody for the first time in person and you're able to say, here are 3 companies we have identified that are similar to what you're doing, and look at what we did for them. And here are their phone numbers, call them and ask them about it. It's huge.
It occurs to me that it might be useful for us to actually say what our businesses are, since we sort of...
Sure.
Yeah, that's a thing. Might be relevant. I'll go first. So I do startup coaching, basically. I work with a lot of organizations that are either in the process of scaling or are trying to create new lines of business. So I work both with independent startups, CEOs and founders on setting up their business at scale and using lean startup. And then I also work with like innovation labs within large corporations that are trying to create a repeatable process to do the same.
Whereas my agency, Brilliant, BRLLNT.co, is a digital experience partner that helps you build and tell your story in all sorts of verticals, including creative, marketing, and technology. A lot of the people that we talk to need to see examples of the work that we've done, whether they're websites or new products or marketing campaigns or social media management or the like. And that is the sum total of selling that we will be doing on this, I swear to God.
I imagine it's a lot easier for you to have a portfolio of things to do to show to folks because you've got the work there and it's typically public, right? Because it's on their website, it's out there already. And that's one of the things that I have struggled with on occasion is, you know, when I'm working with a company on their internal problems and particularly when I'm working with a large corporation on innovation stuff, they don't want me to talk about it at all.
Yeah. Well,
you know, for whether that's a good idea for them or not, it does mean that it's a little harder for me to put together, you know, testimonials and referrals and do case studies because they don't want me to write a case study and say, hey, here's this thing that, you know, such and such large company is working on in their R&D department.
Yeah, that sucks for you, man. I'm sorry. I mean,
you know, it comes with a territory, right? I mean, I think it's, if you want to work in innovation, you have to be okay with some people not wanting to talk about the work that you're doing.
But at the same time, you should be able to foster those relationships into additional work. Surely that they would be able to say to other CEOs, hey, this guy came in and really fixed stuff for us. You should hire him. Yeah.
Well, and one of the things that I've managed to do is, so a shout out to Kevin DeWalt's So Helpful, which is a platform where folks take questions on Skype and things like that. And I have done office hours on that for a long time. And I have a lot of testimonials from folks that have worked with that way. And I have some short testimonials about people that I've worked with as clients without going into sort of the longer details of what I did for them. But a lot of those, because I can't go into depth, I go for numbers. And I don't know if that's working or not, but for example, on my homepage, I think I've just got like a list of 10 people saying, this was great, basically, in various ways.
I will be a reference for you anytime you want. I'll be like, he's a great co-host.
Thanks.
And he's really funny and smart. Sometimes he plays sound effects on his keyboard. It's pretty great. You're going to do it, aren't you?
I was tempted.
They've been perfect with the Chewbacca sound, but that's fine too. Anyway,
I didn't have it queued up.
Well, I would say this. I mean, just to wrap out this story. I mean, I think that anytime that you can talk about your success, no matter the format, that's always going to be a leg up versus not. You should always be tooting your own horn because nobody else will if you don't. So.
Of course, this is exactly going back to the first article we talked about the uncomfortable questions. And it's definitely something people have trouble with. I think one of the great things about referrals is that you don't necessarily have to toot your own horn. You can get someone else to do it for you. And that's, at least for me, that's a lot easier to have somebody else talk about their impression of the work that I did rather than trying to talk about it.
You need a hype man, you give me a call. Indeed.
Always. So the next question we've got on our list here, talking about customer acquisition costs. What strategies did you implement to improve your customer acquisition costs?
Boy, that's a good question.
Both simple and very, very broad.
Exactly. Yeah. I think in general, finding a consistent and good strategy can be challenging. I think that, again, this really depends on your individual business. If we're talking about a service-based industry, one of the challenges is going to be, do you have the kind of business that can be advertised, like we were talking about before, on Facebook and Twitter and Google Ads, et cetera? Or does it really have to be something that is a little bit more pounding the pavement? Customer acquisition costs really vary between industry as well. It costs probably less money for me to go out and it costs probably less direct money for me to go out and get a new client, but I might be losing a lot more time than somebody who can, again, I keep going back to t-shirts just because it's an easy widget, than somebody who can say, I know that with this website, the way that it's currently set up, if I spend $1,000, I can sell 100 t-shirts. And that's a harder translation depending on your business. Well,
and I imagine as your firm is growing, you guys are probably doing a lot more about tracking the costs of business development, right?
Yes.
Once you're beyond a tiny firm, you sometimes want to actually know what your customer acquisition costs, even if it is measured in time. And I think
we're starting to get there. Yeah.
Particularly when you're thinking about doing lead gen, you can do lead gen by going and speaking at a conference, or you can do lead gen by doing, inbound marketing on a blog. And you might want to be able to compare those.
Well, and one of the challenges that I have in my role is I'm one guy and we're a growing firm. And since I don't have other people that I can reliably use for business development, it has to sit on me. So if anybody has any conferences they think I should attend anywhere in the US, or any suggestions on blog posts you'd like to read, I'm happy to hear them.
Just send Jason a
Jason at brilliant.co. That's BRLLNT.co. Podcast listeners, I'm not writing this down. That's ridiculous. But no, absolutely. Looking at the cost of time is very important, and understanding the investment that you're not necessarily spending more money out of your bank account, but that you may not be gaining more revenue because of the time spent is an interesting moment when you suddenly start to go, God, I spent 15, 20 hours trying to convince this guy to spend, 20 grand with us. And I spent 10 hours with this guy and he's spending 50. What did I do differently between the two? Or am I just pitching the wrong kind of business?
Oh yeah. It's so hard to compare and try to draw some lessons out of it when your sample size is so small, right? When you're doing a consulting business where it's high dollar amounts and small numbers of customers, it's easy for a little bit of data to sort of throw it off. Whereas if you are, if you're selling, $1 widget, or we'll go back to t-shirts again. If you're selling like a $15 t-shirt to 1,000 people, you can do a lot more slicing the data that way than if you're selling, a $1,500 consulting package to, 15.
Well, we get it. Well, and I was going to say, then we get into the question of scale, and you and I have talked about this before. When I was early on trying to find a marketing solution that was low cost, low impact, and high value for, for startup founders, and just was like, I'm spending so much time trying to put together this cheap package that people, like, even at 500, people don't want to spend money on. This isn't valuable for me. It's not valuable for me as a business. But to be able to say, give me $5,000 in the cost of building a campaign on Facebook and Twitter, and I can go and find you some really great information about your customers and about the opportunities that lay within these particular market segments, that I can sell no problem. So it's interesting to me because I want to help. Yeah. I want to do what's right, and I want to do what's right for startup founders, and I want to make revenue on it. But there's such an inherent problem in that space. It becomes a challenge to find the right opportunity there.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think fundamentally a lot of improving customer acquisition cost is experiments, right? We're going back to lean startup again. It's you have to measure what you have to actually know what your customer acquisition cost is, and then you have to run experiments on other possible channels, and you pour resources into a channel until that customer acquisition cost goes higher than some other channel, and then you shift the pipeline, or you shift the hose, and you pour those resources into some other channel, and you have to measure it over time, because customer acquisition cost is going to change in different channels over time, and there's diminishing returns in a lot of channels, and you want to be aware of when those diminishing returns mean your CAC has gone above the CAC in another channel, and shift those resources accordingly.
There we go. I knew
customer acquisition cost. Sorry, yeah. I just figured rather than saying customer acquisition cost 15 times in a row, I would actually agree with it.
Well, and this does dovetail with one of the other questions from the SLP that you have in our rundown here. Because one of the questions is that after finding a viable customer acquisition channel, what are some of the common problems that a founder will encounter? Fatigue is absolutely one of those challenges. And what sort of experiments or tests could a founder run to remove those and optimize the funnel? There's about 40, and I think that it always starts with starting over from scratch, personally. Maybe not necessarily every time, but it's certainly the best way to sort of take it from a clean approach and say, what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? And how would we rebuild this if we were starting over from day one?
Yeah. And particularly, I think one of the challenges people run into when they don't start from scratch on channels is you get messaging mismatch, right? So you get, you want a landing page to match what people are expecting to see when they go there. Otherwise conversion drops through the floor, right? If you have a landing page that says like, hey, thanks for liking us on Facebook. Here's that free report that we promised you, and then you send people to that page with Twitter traffic that's promising them something totally different. Yeah. When people land on that page, they're just going to bounce.
Boy, I was going to say it was literally and figuratively. Yes. I did. One of my favorite questions to ask somebody who's interested in marketing is to go, what's a good bounce rate? Just to see what their answer is. Because if somebody says, like 90%, I'm like, do you think that means retention? Versus somebody who says, good bounce rate is 10%. I'm like, well, you're just making that up. You have no idea what's right. Okay, good.
Well, isn't some of it like if they answer the question,
right. The answer actually is it depends on the site,
right? Because context matters. Yeah.
Yeah. Although anybody who tells me that a good bounce rate at 10% is just lying. 10% would be a flipping fantastic bounce rate, and I've only seen in my life a couple of sites that have consistently gotten that. And it usually involves capturing them with some sort of video at the front that everybody has to watch. So, yeah. Anyway,
interesting. Yeah,
there's that. Very cool.
So that brings us to the end of this set of questions. Any parting wisdom on customer acquisition, on marketing, and bringing in, particularly at the early stage, for folks who are building their business, who are in the middle of building their business? I think the parting advice is to be flexible, to be comfortable in the discomfort, and that more than anything else, to be willing to try a lot of different things and to be accepting of the results, as long as you're doing it in a way that is scientific as well as pragmatic. It doesn't really matter what you get. You're going to get the right learnings, and you're just going to have to build on them over time. I think that's it. I think it's just, dig in, do the hard work, be okay with the fact that you're not going to know what you're doing early on, and then grow it from there. Because within
I guarantee anybody who starts doing ads for themselves, as long as they're taking an honest approach to it, if you take an agile approach to, oh my God, I can't believe I was about to say that, an agile approach to a lean problem. Oh, I am full of buzzwords today. God help me. Let me try that again. Do it in 2 weeks sprints. Be honest with yourself. Fix shit when it's broken.
Sprint is also a buzzword.
2 weeks.
Just to point that out there.
No, I really don't.
You want to try a third time?
Super bad at this. I can feel literally every audience member just rolling their eyes at me. Anyway, yeah,
it's cool. We'll talk about agile another time.
Goodness. Anyway, so we have a few minutes left. I want to take it back for a second to one last thing. We have talked a lot today about entrepreneurs and people who are building their business, people in spaces that are uncomfortable. Teague, with your permission, I'd like to take it to a totally different part of the conversation, if that's okay. Okay. So I'd like to bring our audience's attention to something that's happening in actually the larger world of foreign policy, politics, et cetera. We don't spend a lot of time here talking about actual politics, and there's a reason for that, because frankly, that's for other guys who have more of a stake in those kinds of conversations. But I wanted to bring everybody's attention to a very real and human challenge that we're seeing that I'd love anybody's thoughts or responses to. In the Washington Post recently, there was an article about a young man, Mustafa Hassan, who is 23 and is a Syrian refugee. And in case you're not aware, Maryland's governor has made it clear that he is not interested in receiving Syrian refugees. So unfortunately, in the shadows of the Annapolis City Hall, of course, this guy is having some challenges in being recognized and being respected. But he's 23 years old. He's from a small farming hamlet, and he's trying to rebuild his life. He's been through more challenge and more difficulty than any of us listening have probably ever experienced, certainly myself included, having seen his family torn apart by the war in Syria. He arrived in Maryland and is trying very hard to rebuild his life. And he's enrolled in the local community college, and he's working in jobs that none of us would want to take. And he's working as hard as he can to build his life. I think with a focus very specifically on not only building himself up, but eventually helping those that have also been displaced by the civil war going on in Syria. As somebody who has experienced, I think, a tremendous amount of hardship, I've decided, along with members of my family and, of course, other folks here in the DC startup scene, to try to help in whatever ways we can. So in the show notes and here in the chat, we're linking to the story. I'll also go ahead and link to, if you are feeling generous, and there's obviously no obligation here, but if you're feeling like you want to contribute, we're trying to help. We're trying to help him raise his. We're trying to help him raise money to go to community college. Anne Arundel Community College is part of the Maryland school system here. If he's able to attend, he'll have a direct line to the University of Maryland, where he can study virtually anything and have a very, very good education. He's 23 years old. His life has been torn apart. You certainly don't have to donate if you don't have the time, energy, or money. But if you're inclined to, or you just simply want to share the story to others that might be interested, I'd really appreciate it. I think that it's the kind of thing where it's really easy to think about problems as very far and away from our own. And I think that in a world where we're all fortunate enough to have the problems of, gee, how do I find better targeting on Facebook versus my world got bombed and now I need to start over, I think it's worth every now and again taking a step back and recognizing that sometimes it's really important to help others who don't necessarily have the ability to help themselves immediately. He lacks only the resources, not the drive, not the commitment, and not the dedication. And for those of you that can help, it's greatly appreciated. And for those of you that can't, we totally understand, but spread the word, because I think every little bit helps. Anyway, that's my good giving rant for the day. I hope that it's well received.
Certainly.
I think so. I think that when your problem is, gee, I need to lock a contract for $50,000 and they're trying to get me down to 40, it's a little different than this guy's trying to raise $50,000 to go to college because his world got, torn apart. Super uplifting story, actually, if you take the chance to read it, because as hard as it is, he has a remarkable attitude, and it's really impressive to see. Yeah. Anyway.
Excellent.
Teague, I think I've talked a lot on this episode. I do apologize if at any point you felt as though I was going too far. But you know me. Once I get on a topic, I just keep going. Stop.
That's why you're a great co-host.
Teague texts in the background. I get these texts from him. Dude, you're going on forever. That's not true. You've never texted me. You're always very generous with that, and I appreciate it. It's all
G-chat, exactly not text.
Well, it looks like we're wrapping up here. Teague, if folks have follow-up questions, concerns, comments, just want to say hi, how should they reach out to you?
They should reach out to me either on Twitter or on my website. Both of those are Teague Hopkins. Those TeagueHopkins.com or at Teague Hopkins. That's TeaGue and Hopkins, like you would expect it to be.
And I'm available on Twitter at Jason Nellis, JasonNellis, or you can email me directly, jason@brilliant.co, and that's BRLLNT.co. You are also welcome to join us anytime for any of our future shows, live or via podcast. You can find out more information on our website, StartupJab.com. And of course, please, follow us on Blab, follow us on iTunes or your favorite podcasting platform. Leave us a review, download an episode, tell a friend, all that lovely stuff. Teague, am I forgetting anything? Wow.
No.
It's rare that I get it all in one fell swoop. All right, buddy. Well, as always, it's a pleasure to host a show with you. Play us out. All right. Let's do it.
Likewise.